Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the ANCSA Symposium. My name is Charlene Stern. I've had the privilege of meeting several of you in this room. I'm originally from Arctic Village, or Vashaiko, as it's known in my language. I currently serve as the Vice Chancellor for Rural Community and Native Education here at UAF, and want to acknowledge a couple people in the room. We have under my unit 2 colleges, the College of Rural and Community Development, which includes our 5 rural campuses in Dillingham, Nome, Bethel, Kotzebue, Interior, Alaska, and did I say Bethel? And so we have our Dean here of CRCD, Dean Brian Uher. If you could just give a little bit of a wave, wanted to acknowledge our Dean of a lot of our academic programs. And then also another dean under my unit is Michelle Stalder, who's the dean of the Community and Technical College, CTC Downtown. You could just give a wave, Michelle. Thank you for being here. We have a number of our faculty within the Department of Alaska Native Studies and Rural Development as well. I think we have some of our tribal governance faculty that are going to be here. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Dr. Waki Charles back there. Dr. Waki is our first ever Indigenous Director of the Alaska Native Language Center. We're pretty proud of that. ANLC is going to be celebrating its 50th year anniversary this October 4th. So we're going to be having a big initiative on campus. So I also want to just take this opportunity to also introduce Dr. Barb Amarak, who is our director of our Northwest campus. If you could say hello, Dr. Amarak. We also had our provost, our UAF provost, Prakash, who is sitting in on the morning session and just talked about how much she enjoyed that session, and we'll be back here shortly. So we wanted to take an opportunity to introduce you to a few of the students that we have. A lot of our students are actually online because of COVID restrictions. We wanted to somewhat restrict the admission into the event for in-person, but we have a lot of our students here and many more who are called in online across the state. And we've also been recording this session, so we hope to be able to use some segments of it to inform future educational opportunities and classes that focus on ANCSA. So with that, I'm going to ask Thiele to come back up here, and we'll just have the students that are here joined us in the room introduce themselves, maybe share their name, their where they're from, and what course of study that they are currently pursuing. We also have some recent alumni in this group as well.
Maybe we'll just hand it to the first student and they can walk it down. So if you want to introduce yourself, put your mouth right up to that mic.
Hi, my name is Casey Jack. Atka Chakatahuk. My Yupik name is Chakatah. I'm from Stebbins, Alaska. I'm doing a Bachelor of Arts in the Yupik language.
Hi, my name is Destiny Reimers, and I am on the women's basketball team. I'm getting my degree in rural development. I'm originally from Iliamna, Alaska, and yeah.
Hi, I'm Julian Dan. I'm at the International Arctic Research Student as a graduate student, and I've been studying how we use satellites in land management contexts.
Good afternoon. My name is Vera Lincoln from Inuktitut Pass. I'm here with the RD Master's Program.
Hello, my name is Katria Takata Glushkov. I'm a master's student at the Geophysical Institute in Geoscience, and I study sea ice and knowledge co-production, specifically looking at sea ice change off of coastal communities through indigenous local observations and satellite observations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas Jasik. I'm a Kenaitze tribal member, and I am a first-year master's student in this College of Fisheries and Ocean Science. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Bobby Allen. I am an alumni of Dansard. I've received a Bachelor's of Arts in Alaska Native Studies, and I also received an Associate of Science in Tribal Management. I am currently a law student at Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law out of Minnesota. And I'm a member of the Native Village of Nelson Lagoon and a shareholder of Aleut Corporation.
Hi, Shojri Lani Oji, Deni Gotskan Isli, Gatalanguchi. My name is Lonnie Bursch. I'm from Stevens Village, but I live here in Fairbanks, and I'm a master's student in rural development.
My name is Elton Chanar. Originally from Tuxik Bay. I'm working on getting my bachelor's in rural development with a minor in Alaska Native Studies.
I'm Tanya Beans. My Yupik name is Ahanak. I'm from Mountain Village on the Lower Yukon. I'm working toward getting my bachelor's in elementary ed with a certificate in tribal management.
Thank you, students. It's awesome to see all of your faces. Thanks for participating. Shout out to Destiny's parents are in the back over there. Lisa and Steve, if you want to wave. It takes a lot of support to get through the semester, so. And also I'm going to say shout out to Maggie. I know you're online and we have other students that are online as well. Oh, Charlene abandoned me. I'll come over here. Okay. My spot. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the lunch and enjoyed the cookies and the opportunity to chat and visit with each other. So our first afternoon panel is focused on Alaska policy and ANCSA and how Alaska Native corporations shape and influence policy both here in Alaska and also in Washington, D.C., as well as what issues our institutions want to focus on in the coming years. Our panel will be moderated by Sarah Obed. So if the moderator and panelists want to come forward. Sarah Obed, Senior Vice President of External Affairs, is responsible for representing Doyon Limited on a wide range of matters before federal, state, and local governments. She is responsible for reviewing and analyzing legislative issues that impact Doyon's businesses. Sarah oversees corporate and shareholder communications, including print and digital media and press relations. A Doyon shareholder and a Minto tribal member, Sarah and her husband, Stephen, are raising their daughters here in Fairbanks. Go, Sarah.
Thank you, Tia. Wasn't that panel this morning amazing? I just want to say thank you to those panelists this morning because it was a really wealthy conversation, and I hope and I know our panel this afternoon can definitely meet and exceed those expectations set from this morning's panel. Just to introduce our panelists, I want to introduce my friends. I'll introduce Raina first because she's first on my list. She serves as the Senior Advisor to the Secretary of the Interior for Alaska Affairs and Strategic Priorities. She serves as the Department of Interior's policy lead on issues related to Alaska, which comprises a large proportion of the department's overall portfolio. Raina spent her career in public service, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. In her previous public service role, she was President Obama's tribal liaison and led planning for President Obama's historic 2015 trip to Alaska. Raina was born and raised in Alaska, and her family hails from Pedro Bay Village on Lake Iliamna and Alexander Creek. She is Dena'ina Athabaskan and Yupik. Rex Rock Jr., can you guess which one Rex is? Rex serves as the policy advisor for rural outreach and economic development with the Alaska Native Corporations and Governor Dunleavy's office. In this role, he also works on a variety of state and federal tribal issues. Rex is on the board of directors of the Tikyak Corporation, a village corporation created through ANCSA, representing the Inupiat people around Point Hope. He also serves on the North Pacific Research Board. Rex is a whaling hunter and the son of Rex Rock Sr., who is the president of the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. Welcome, Rex. Sarah Lukin is CIRI's Chief Strategy Officer and plays a key role in identifying long and short-term business strategies for CIRI while ensuring the organization maintains strategy at the forefront of decision-making and management of resources. So Sarah, you want to wave? She also oversees the corporate affairs and shareholder program departments and is responsible for Ceres government relations. Sarah is Alutic and is from the village of Port Lions, a remote community on Kodiak Island. She is a shareholder of Kodiak Inc. and Afognak Native Corporation and is an enrolled tribal member of the Native Village of Afognak and the Native Village of Port Lions. Welcome, Sarah. And next to me here is Liz Saagulik Hensley. She is NANA's Vice President of External and Government Affairs and is responsible for developing, managing, and leveraging relationships with key stakeholders and partners in advancing NANA's mission. Saagulik has worked for NANA as a staff attorney and as a partner in a private law firm, advising Alaska business and Alaska Native tribes, organizations, and corporations. Saagulik is a NANA shareholder and a tribal citizen of the Native Village of Kotzebue. So let's welcome our panelists. And we have a couple of topics that we identified that we hope to speak about. We'll kind of hope to cover those first. And then just like in the last panel, we hope to solicit input from the members online and here in the room. If you guys have questions, so we'll encourage those questions as well. So this first question is really directed at Sarah Lukin, and it really is going to be about the Chehalis legislation or litigation rather. And Sarah, we just hope that you'll tell us a little bit about what that litigation was and how it impacted Alaska Native corporations.
Sure, I'm happy to cover that topic. It's incredibly complex, so bear with me. It's going to take a little time to unpack it and really explain both the short-term impacts as well as the long-term impacts of that litigation on Alaska Native corporations and Alaska Native people. But before I start, I do want to say I'm a UAF alumni, Master's in Rural Development. It's great to be back. Super happy to be here. So the Chehalis litigation all started back in March of 2020 when Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, or CARES Act, as many of us have heard it referred to. CARES Act established a $150 billion coronavirus relief fund to help Americans combat and recover from the impacts of COVID-19. As part of the CARES Act, Congress set aside $8 billion for Indigenous organizations across the United States to support Native people and Native communities. And within the CARES Act, how they defined Indian tribe was through the 1975 Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, or ISDEA, okay? And they really use this ISDEA definition specifically as tribal governments or Indian tribes to make sure that Alaska Native corporations were included in the legislation, as well as lower 48 Indian tribes, okay? So why ISDEA? What does ISDEA do? ISDEA is the federal, it's basically a provision that Congress established that allows the federal government to provide funding to eligible Alaska Native and American Indian tribes to improve the well-being of our Native people, okay? So CARES Act passes in March of 2020. In April of 2020, a group of tribes, largely from the lower 48, but a couple of Alaska tribes as well, filed in court to stop any CARES Act payments going to Alaska Native corporations or ANCs. So ANCs fought this court case called Chehalis. And in fact, we took it all the way to the US Supreme Court and we won. As a result of winning that court case, we did receive our allocation of CARES Act funding, which totaled almost $500 million for Alaska Native people and Alaska Native communities. Well, this is a really significant short-term victory for Alaska Native people, right? Because we clearly needed that funding to help our Native people and our Native communities, particularly those in some of the most remote areas of Alaska. really the most significant victory out of that Chehalis court case is long-term, because it supported the inclusion of Alaska Native corporations in the definition of ISDEA, okay? So why does that matter? Why should you care about that? Because ISDEA allows Alaska Native corporations and our affiliated Native organizations to participate in federal programs, a vast array of federal programs. In fact, about 60 of them. That provide us access to everything like employment services, education, healthcare, and other social justice and cultural heritage programs to provide to Alaska Native people, okay? So I wanna kind of pause there, because I could talk for the next 2 hours about how we spent our CARES Act allocation and what impacts we made in the Native community. But this panel is about policy. And so what I wanted to do is kind of pause there and say, we got the court case through, we won, and I want to talk a bit about ISDEA and how it's used in the state of Alaska. And I'm going to use a particular example around SERI, because I could talk about SERI. Every region is slightly different, but I'm going to focus right now on SERI and Alaska Native healthcare, because when you think about Alaska Native corporations, you often think about dividends, jobs, government contracting. You don't often think about Alaska Native healthcare, okay? So in the lower 48, healthcare can be delivered directly by the Indian Health Service, or IHS, to American Indians through federal funding or provided on clinics on Indian reservations, okay? There is no IHS healthcare in Alaska. In fact, today, about 99% of Alaska's healthcare services are managed by tribal entities, with a large share administered by Alaska Native corporations and our affiliated Native organizations. In fact, SERI and our tribally designated organizations, Cook Inlet Tribal Council and South Central Foundation in particular, have greatly expanded and improved upon the health and social services provided within the SERI region. Okay, so how did we do this? In 1982, the SERI Board of Directors designated South Central Foundation, or SCF, as SERI's tribally designated organization, dedicated to providing health and dental services within the municipality of Anchorage and the Mat-Su borough. And I say tribally designated organization very intentionally, because that is a legal term. And it basically means that acting under SERI's delegated tribal authority, SCF can and has entered into numerous ISDEA determination contracts with the Indian Health Service. Okay, so without that designation that SERI provides South Central Foundation, South Central Foundation could not provide healthcare services with IHS funding. In 1995, SERI became the first and to date the only ANC to enter into a Title V compact with the executive branch. So along with we also have to pass a number of resolutions authorizing them to compact and pursue funding opportunities with federal programs. So I think I would just kind of take that full service circle and kind of wrap up by saying that, you know, Alaska Native corporations working very closely with our federally recognized tribes, with our tribally designated organizations, can really, if we leverage those programs correctly, can really step into the shoes of the federal government and provide some much needed programs and services to our Native people across the state of Alaska. So with that, I'll stop there. That was a lot. I hope I unpacked that properly, Sarah.
That was a lot to take in. I think your last comments, you mentioned ISDEA, a tribe under the definition of ISDEA, and then you mentioned federally recognized tribes. And I think that's an important distinction that is probably a good conversation to have at this symposium. And I don't know if you or any of the other panelists want to speak to that in terms of policy and policy making especially as we think about the next 50 years?
Hello, good afternoon. And I feel like I could listen to Sarah all day because I'm sitting here learning from her. So, wow. I think that, and I'm Saagulik Liz Hensley. I just want to say thanks for inviting me to participate today. I appreciate Doyon and UAF putting this panel together. And to the students, I'm so glad you're here. And also the educators, like I see you, I appreciate the work that you're doing so much. When it comes to, I work at NANA. I've worked for Manila, our tribal health organization as well, and also have supported, done legal work for tribes, tribal organizations, co-management organizations, ANCs across Alaska. And I'm just in my role at NANA it's like 2 months in at this point. So I'm brand new, but something that is really, to me, important is like what Sarah is saying, to understand sort of the lay of the land and just who we are working with. And this takes me kind of back in time to NANA's creation and really to the 60s when our tribal leadership, our village leadership came together and decided amongst themselves that we needed to stand up and advocate for our land rights. So our village leadership came out and got together, and they formed an organization called Northwest Alaska Native Association, NANA, which is not our existing NANA today. It was the predecessor. They formed that organization in order to advocate for our land claims. The Settlement Act passed, and what they ended up doing was forming NANA Regional Corporation as our for-profit institution, and then formed Manila Association to serve as our tribal nonprofit organization. It also has a different legal status. It's a tribal consortium under the ISDA. It's a tribal organization. And to me, that history is really important to understand because it shows that like we are a people. We are the Inuit people of Northwest Alaska. And our people came out and said, we're going to form different institutions to represent our interests. And when I learned about that, it helped me understand that it's really not, these organizations didn't just form themselves, and they didn't, it was our leadership who collectively said that as a people, we need tools to advocate for our interests in these different spaces. So we do have now NANA that is working to generate revenues for our shareholders, managing our lands. We've got Manila Association that is compacting with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service to provide programs, functions, services under those sections of ISDA. And our tribes, they continue to operate and are a really critical part of the puzzle here. They govern. They are at this point, as of the 1990s, on the federally recognized tribes list. And so they continue to govern. So we all are kind of working together because we are a people using the tools that we have available to us to advance our region, our shareholders, and our tribal citizens.
Go ahead, Raina. There's a mic right next to you.
I'm like, I don't want that mic. Hi, everybody. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I just to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Liz mentioned. There's an interesting context here when it comes to the lower 48 tribes in this conversation, and kind of the way that that's structured in the lower 48 and the way that federal Indian law works. And so, and this has kind of created a lot of controversy, a lot of disagreement between the lower 48 tribes and Alaska due to Chehalis for the most part. And part of the reason why that tension exists is because in the lower 48, tribes are the prominent entity, right? Tribes own their lands. Tribes, if there are settlement resources of some sort, that those are under the tribal jurisdiction, right? In Alaska, we have a much more complex landscape, right? As Liz was talking about, we have not only tribes that are federally recognized, but we also have village ANCs, we have regional ANCs, we have boroughs, we have municipalities, we have all these different kind of intersections of leadership and authority, which just make it not apples to apples to compare with the lower 48. And I think that is in part why we have so many issues and disagreements with other tribes on occasion, is because folks don't understand these nuances that exist up in Alaska, and that you can't really just focus on one governing entity necessarily if you want to be effective. You have to work across all these different governing entities.
And I just want to put a pin in that and say, throughout this Chehalis litigation, Alaska Native corporations, we don't think we're sovereign governments, and we never argued that we were sovereign governments. Alaska Native tribes, American Indian tribes in the lower 48 states are sovereign governments. But we are mandated by Congress to provide for the social, economic, and cultural well-being of our Native people in perpetuity. And participation in programs like ISDEA and the CARES Act allow us to meet that congressional mandate.
Hold at that, Sarah. One question I had is and I think Liz Craval, you mentioned this earlier, education, always working on education about our Alaska Native corporations and spending a lot of time. So in DC specifically, like how do you spend your day? And maybe Raina, you have some opinions or knowledge about what we can do better, and how we can better inform the lower, so we're not going to court. Instead of going to court, maybe what can we do better to communicate with our relatives in the lower 48 about how we're tasked with working amongst our multiple organizations to represent and do well on behalf of all Alaska Native people, whether they're shareholders, INCSA shareholders or not.
And I can speak to this from like my non-Department of the Interior hat because this kind of predates this current role I have at Department of the Interior. But one of the conversations that I had over and over again during the Chehalis litigation when that was going through the courts and kind of in the aftermath was that we absolutely need to have that education and outreach to our cousins in the lower 48, right? There are many more similarities than differences across this whole continent. And so that was something that I was pushing really hard, is like, how do we open up that conversation between the lower 48 and our tribes up here, especially in our corporations up here, especially because there's so little understanding about how we're structured and how we deliver services, how we economically develop. That conversation, I think, has been pushed forward by certain folks, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the congressional side as well, because many Congress people are hearing from just one group, right? And not from other groups. And so, you know, when you have that kind of maybe distortion in the information that is being received, you're going to have certain outcomes, right? And so when folks go out to DC, I've always encouraged them, like, don't just talk to the Alaska delegation, you know, talk to everybody else too, because the Alaska delegation is great. They're trying to do good work, but they can't convince all their colleagues, you know, to come to the table and to better understand Alaska. That really has to be an educational process, which we have to pursue.
Sarah or Liz, or Rex, do you guys want to speak to that?
Ditto what Raina said. Okay. But yeah, and I think Sarah and I first got to spend time together, 12 years ago when we were both living in DC, maybe?
6 years. Just kidding.
Yeah. After, of course, knowing each other a bit from up here. And it just really was an ongoing process of education, re-education. And it really starts though with educating ourselves. So I kind of commend everybody for being here and learning more about what we've got going on I think it's fair to say that also we may understand our own region and the dynamics in our own region, the setup in our own region. But I mean, Alaska is so diverse, and it's not that people aren't necessarily publishing about their regions, about their initiatives, about their relationships within their region. So it's not like you can go Google everything. So it's really about, how do I educate myself? How do I get out there, talk with people, and educate myself so that I then can share that message with a broader audience. And I would agree 100% that maintaining our communication within Alaska, and then again with folks, our cousins in the lower 48, and with people in positions of leadership, responsibility, and power is just really important so that people can make informed decisions. And we kind of have to take that upon ourselves and really get out there. It might not be our way. In fact, it's probably not most of our way to just get out there and start talking about ourselves and, what our people are doing, and really, sharing about ourselves, but we kind of have to do it. We do have to get out there. The impacts of the Halas Win were huge for our people. I think people in the lower 48 had concerns. I don't know I won't kind of repeat some of what was in their pleadings filed in the court and whatnot. I just know that in the NANA region, we received about $38 million. And I think Koluk mentioned that we have 15,000 shareholders. We were able to get money out to help offset the cost of responding to the pandemic to 92% of our shareholders. That was cash in the pockets of people who were struggling and having unforeseen expenses like, masks, my goodness, up until this, those things cost money. Cleaning supplies, like mortgage payments, electric, all of that, when people might be home, not able to work. So, and this is just one example of one policy position that's been so impactful, but this matters. This affects actual individual people.
So I think it's interesting that we're talking about the Chehalis litigation, because this is a policy panel. It's not a litigation panel. And I always tell people I'm not a lawyer. I never will be one. But if we do think about policy, like what would be some of the major policy issues that you're facing to this day? And I want to maybe start with Raina, because I know the Department of Interior has been hosting, and this question came up in the lands panel earlier, but the Department of Interior hosted a number of subsistence consultations and communications. So what's going on there? What do you guys got? What are you guys thinking?
Thanks, Sarah. And that's a great question. And I'm really happy to talk about this particular topic because it's one that's really close to my heart. So we have hosted several tribal consultations and ANC consultations focused on Alaska Native subsistence. And the reason that I say Alaska Native subsistence versus just subsistence is because under the federal system, subsistence isn't just for Alaska Native people in the state of Alaska. And so these sessions were specifically trying to kind of tilt the conversation a little bit and trying to get that perspective from Alaska Native people about what's working and what's not. And so we had, I believe, 4 or 5 sessions, which were really well attended. We had a ton of great feedback. And really the impetus for those sessions was really to respond to what we've been hearing from AFN, from tribes, from ANCs, that subsistence access is the #1 issue in the state among Alaska Native people. For folks who are familiar with the federal subsistence program, you know that it's a rural preference versus Alaska Native preference. And that was from ANILCA back in 1980. And we've received a ton of input kind of in the lead up to those consultations about what folks would like to see change in the federal subsistence program. But what we needed to do was to have those formal consultations and have those recorded, have those comments written down and sort of compiled and summarized, because that whole track record will be the underpinning of whatever we decide to go forth with, probably the next several months. And so the next step in that process is really just to synthesize all of that information, ensure that we have a really good understanding of what Alaska Native people want to see in terms of changes to the program, and then determine what we can do going forward. And this isn't just a Department of the Interior initiative. This is actually cuts across USDA. This cuts across NOAA as well. And so we have brought our federal colleagues along with us, kicking and screaming, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. We've brought them along with us to join this effort, because there are so many different authorities that exist in the different agencies. It can't just be one agency. And so we've really tried to bring the whole group together to say, okay, you have a big fishing regulatory role, and then we have a lot of co-management organizations, and we have the Federal Subsistence Board. How do we ensure that we're covering all these bases and marching in the right direction and in the same direction as our agency colleagues? So that's really the impetus behind it. The last time this was reviewed was back in 2010. Pat Porchot, who used to work as the Alaska Special Assistant, did this really wonderful set of meetings all across the state. Because it's a pandemic and we just, who knows how much time we have, we decided to do this over a kind of a remote platform, which worked out really well, actually. But what our hope is that we can publish and push out these recommendations that folks have submitted to us, and ultimately make some recommendations internally and across our other agency colleagues to be responsive and make some improvements to the program. So that's where we currently are. Our consultation period has closed. However, we are still open for input. So if folks want additional information, I'm happy to share that and our next steps.
What might some of those recommendations look like? You mentioned access, so.
Yeah, so some of these are, so there's kind of different buckets of what these recommendations can look like. There's policy, right? So what can we do at Department of the Interior, sort of, with our own authorities to make some changes? What can we do regulatorily, right? So under regulation, what can we do to make some positive changes? And then if there are legislative changes that need to take place, that's obviously a much bigger conversation, which has to be, kind of go through the White House and go through OMB and all these different checks. And so what we're focused on right now is sort of all three of those buckets, right? Like the easiest one for us is obviously the policy changes that we can do unilaterally, right, within our own department. But then we have all these other things that we can also start to work on, which would most likely require that we work across the other departments that have equities. And so, for instance, one thing that was mentioned over and over again in the consultations was taking the Office of Subsistence Management out of Fish and Wildlife Service. That was one thing that kind of came up perennially. So for folks who were on those consultations, you kind of heard that. And we haven't agreed to do that yet, but that is one example of like what could happen, right? If that's distilled in the report that we're coming up with. Rex.
Thank you. First off, I think I might need like Aaron and maybe Fred to come up here. I got some high level women up here. Like I need some male backup or something like that. It's kind of intimidating. But so from like the state level for the subsistence side, I've heard many, I guess when I first came on, the first task I was given was the fish issue on the Yukon, which obviously is a touchy subject. And so a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, and I can't do like even fathom what it was like for us, like if we were told we couldn't go whaling anymore and somebody had to supply us some muktuk meat, and I was like, it just would be awkward. And so trying to educate some of our people on the state side is like, so what is it like? I'm like, well,
that's a completely different region, completely different traditions, and they're like, so it's things like that where, you know, I guess people like ourselves in our roles, it's extremely important to have continuous conversations with leaders like Sarah and Aaron and Sarah, but you know, we've listened and we've heard where, you know, we understand that it's been depleting for a while. And one of the guys was saying, like, when they used to go out and they used to fish and they used to get like 250, and then it went down to 150, then 75, and then only 25, and it's like, then now it's like nothing. And then so for us, is we're trying to figure out what that issue is, and that's just going to be an ongoing conversation, like Raina had said earlier. And we hope to, and we are looking to try to get to some type of answer there. And that's our commissioner, Doug Benson Lang. So if you guys have any questions or comments, he's supposed to be making trips out this way to have your voices heard again. And my line is always open. Like I said before, I got a ton of phone calls for some of those issues that were taking place. And, you know, we tried to figure out what it would be. And it's like, but well, if we get one thing, then it's like, okay, do we offset it with something else? And it's like, then it's becomes a slippery slope. And we're trying not to look at only one issue. And we're trying to make sure that we don't cause a ripple effect throughout the state for subsistence, because obviously that's key and that's hugely important.
Thanks, Rex. I am outside of subsistence. Are there other policy issues that any of you guys want to speak to that you think we should be thinking about in terms of ANCs are willing to engage in or move the needle on? Yeah, Liz.
Sure, I'll start. I am incredibly passionate about making sure that Alaska Native corporations maintain our rights under Executive Order 13175. That executive order states that the federal government has an obligation and is required to consult with tribes and Alaska Native corporations on any policy or regulatory issues that impact their Native people. Basically, ensuring that we can consult with the federal government, make sure that we have a seat at the table and we have a voice when critical issues like subsistence, like CARES Act, that when those issues come up. There have been inconsistent implementations of Executive Order 13175. There's currently a piece of legislation in the House called the RESPECT Act, which is specifically designed to codify in federal legislation and mandate through Congress consultation with tribes and Alaska Native corporations. Whether or not that piece of legislation will pass is yet to be seen. I have to do a deep analysis on that before I can tell you whether or not I'm going to, whether or not I really like that one. But I do like the concept of Congress passing a law that requires federal agencies to consult with Alaska Native corporations and tribes.
Oh, I thought you were going to respond, Raina.
So that's something that is on Nana's radar as well. And I think, so ditto, if I could just be the ditto person up here, I would be. But something, that has been really important since I've joined Nana in the last 2 months is really just looking at ensuring that there is a legal, regulatory, public policy environment that enables our region to be sustainable economically. And so that's not looking at any one individual law. I'm really glad that Sarah brought up the RESPECT Act, but it's really looking at a series and just what is the entire environment there, because it is tremendously important to us that people have the opportunity to remain in their village if they want to live there. And there is currently the price of heating fuel in NOTAC just went up to, I might say it wrong, I might get them backwards, $17 per gallon. No, did it go 19? So heating oil, it is as far for 3 weeks ago, $16 a gallon, gas $17 a gallon, and we're expecting that same price hike to happen in other villages. That's people, we've recently conducted a home heating survey, and basically the results just tell you what you already knew, but just smack you in the face, because people are literally they weren't heating their homes during the middle of winter. People are choosing between paying for like their rent, their mortgage, food, diapers, or to heat their homes. It's particularly challenging too, because we live a subsistence lifestyle, and it does, like Richard said earlier, cost money to do that these days. So we are very concerned. We have a village economic investment program that's really looking at how to ensure the rubber meets the road when it comes to the benefits of ANCSA in our villages. And we've got a team really working to help, make sure that people can live in our villages if they want to. And that's part of that involves working within the realm of Arctic policy, because while that's way up here, it really trickles down. And of course, what's happening at the local level trickles up, but really creating that environment where our people can thrive. It also involves ensuring that, regulations work for people for hunting and fishing. So I'm so thankful that the department is relooking at that. The work that was done in 2010 was fantastic. And it's really great that that's being looked at again. And it also means, like what Koluk already spoke about this morning, we've got about 10 years left on the Red Dog mine, and it has been, it's our region's largest private employer. It provides substantial revenue to NANA, provides for 85% of our borough's annual budget, and billions of dollars. Am I getting it wrong? 2.6 billion has been shared through 7i to other regions. So we're, for us, then it's important to have a policy framework that can help us promote economic development and create that bridge to the future sustainability for the region. So in our region, that often means ensuring that responsible resource development can occur. And it means making sure that certain infrastructure can be put in place, including the potential NOTAC road, which would help reduce the cost of everything in NOTAC. And of course, the Ambler Access Project, which would help reduce the cost of stuff going into the Upper Kobuk, where people are paying crazy amounts for supplies, goods, fuel, etc. So I know that that's a little bit of a broad answer to your question, but it really is, my 2 months in, that's been my marching orders. We need to help our people. So thanks for the question, Sarah.
Sarah, I think you also had an answer.
I have one more. If Sarah was the queen for the day and I could pass a piece of legislation through Congress, what would it do? I would also like to exclude Alaska Native Corporation settlement trusts from being considered within eligibility determinations for needs-based federal programs. So what do I mean by that? We have a lot of elders that get elder financial support through their ANC settlement trust, but that financial support that they receive as elders then oftentimes will disqualify them for federal needs-based financial support. And so if we could somehow make it so they could continue to receive their elder benefit from their Native corporation, as well as continue to receive those federal program dollars, I think that would be huge for their quality of life.
My turn to ditto. Yeah, I've been fortunate to be ASRC, and we see that with our elders all the time, where they built a home for all the elders to kind of be able to mingle. and none of them qualified. There was an outsider that moved there and lived there, like, had the whole place to himself. It was amazing. But going back to the policy side for fuel and whatnot, you know, you got the governors trying to constitutionalize the PCEs, and then you saw the legislature pass I think it was like $1,200 or something like that, the stipend. You know, hopefully there's going to be more for like the rural areas, and we could kind of joke about that maybe. But you know, with the misunderstanding of the PCEs, where I think they think the governor is trying to take the PCEs away with the reverse sweep. And what happened there was it didn't have enough votes to pass, so he reverse sweeped it so that way he can continue to try to fund the PCEs. I mean, he's funded the PCE fund, I think, every single year he's been in office. So, you know, with the inflation going up, you know, we may have to revisit that budget and maybe put in a few more with just the crazy hikes. And, you know, I had a discussion earlier, just moments ago before stepping on up to the panel of what would it take to build another fuel storage tank outside so we won't worry about running out of fuel, and kind of be locked in. So in case you get some of these other price hikes, and it's just, it's going to be an ongoing discussion, you know, unfortunately, but, you know, hopefully we can come to some kind of conclusion sooner rather than later.
Rex, on that note, maybe this is a question for you and Raina about President Biden signed in this huge bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it's supposed to be for transportation infrastructure. I know Liz talked about this Kobuk Road and the Ambler Road and roads. I'm not looking at my boss over there, but roads can be very controversial in Alaska. I know Raina's working on the Eisenbeck Road probably too, but Senator Murkowski had this huge grant forum yesterday. Like, how can we get those dollars to our respective regions? How can Alaska Native corporations be part of the process? Maybe not for roads, but for telecommunications. How can we talk about economic development, we talk about rural economic development. It's going to be public-private partnerships. It's going to be these public investments in our communities. It's a lot of money. And we know from the pandemic how critical it was, and we know our communities are underserved. So how can we bring Alaska to the table and make sure we're bringing our communities along? So Sarah and Liz, you're also welcome to participate in the answers to those questions.
I can go first, sir. So it's a good question. I think there's so much money that's out there right now that folks are kind of wondering where to start, right? Because there's so many grant programs.
Give me the keys right now.
Right. There's so many application processes, right? So, you know, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work, a lot of capacity to be able to access a lot of this funding. If it's not formula funding, meaning that they just kind of calculate it based on the information they have and like ship it out to the state or to the tribe. If it's not that way, then you've got to go through the whole application process, and it's just really a lengthy process, which you know, probably could stand to be streamlined a little bit. But in terms of the rollout of that money, what I've been telling folks is even if the ANCs are not getting kind of an allocation for something that's bill related, that doesn't mean you can't work with the state of Alaska, right? To like access contracting opportunities, right? Where they will be building these things out. There's a huge amount of money from NTIA, which is under commerce, which will be for broadband development across the state of Alaska. And there will be a ton of work that has to be done in order to connect the entire state, including rural Alaska. And so all of these opportunities, maybe it's not a direct opportunity necessarily, but there are opportunities there when there's this much resource going out into different projects across the board. And so I'd really encourage folks to keep in touch with the folks who are getting the formula funding to ensure that that everyone is benefiting from that.
Yeah, so we're just so thankful for President Biden's signature on that bill and Senator Murkowski's work on it and the infrastructure symposium that staff or just like 1,000 people were registered to attend, right? So in our region, one of the tools that we use is the Northwest Arctic Leadership Team, which is NANA, Maniluk Association, which is our tribal nonprofit, the Northwest Arctic Borough and the Northwest Arctic Borough School District. So together we form the Northwest Arctic Leadership Team and WALT. The top executive and the chair of each of those entities get together and talk about priorities. And one of their priorities was to create an infrastructure work group that is comprised of staff from all of those organizations. So in that work group, which I sit on, we have collectively put our heads together to figure out and try to make sure that our region is able to access that money to the greatest extent possible. Because, you know, with Maniluk, its members are our 12 tribes. And so Maniluk works with those tribes directly and helps provide capacity to them because not all tribes have, you know, the technical expertise to go after the grants and then do the monitoring or actually implement them. And then always the reporting, which can be challenging. And then we've got our borough, and cities, which the municipal framework within our region. So that's one way that we are trying anyways to really maximize our ability to access those infrastructure funds. We'll report back in 5 to 8 years and let you know how we did.
Thank you. Yeah, so over at the state, we have one person who is dedicated to this. So I think he has a few more gray hairs and a few more bald spots on his head. So he's been tirelessly working at this thing. And
what's his name, Rex?
Miles Baker is his name.
Everybody get your pen. What's his phone number?
I can definitely give that out to you guys. And that's the other reason is to if you guys have any questions or want to set up a meeting, we are more than happy to have you guys, whether it's a conference call or a Zoom or something along those lines. It's definitely going to be it's going to have to be a collaborative effort. We've noticed that already. So we've started to work with AFN, Julie Kitka over there. So she's been awesome to work with the Navigator program. So they've reached out and helped people kind of set up for the grants, like Saagulik is your UBAP name? Saagulik. So they've like she had touched on, and so extremely helpful for us. You know, we realize we have some shortfalls of the state, so that way we're able to work with her so she has like a lot more massive outreach. And I believe like 40% of the monies are going to come out. It's like over 5 years. So you don't have to panic yet. And it's like all free fall for the money that's coming out. I think, you know, broadband, I think was touched. We won't touch the Ambler Road right now, but you know, broadband was touched on. And so we've got a task force, and if you guys need something like that with to try to figure out how to go after some of those grants, definitely feel free to reach out. And we have who is it, Tyson, Miles Baker, myself, we all have our hands in that. So if you have any questions or meetings that want to be set up, where if you have some shortfalls, again, we can assist. And so I guess within 5, I guess we'll have to come up with a 5-year plan once we get the money for the BEADS. I think it's called BEADS program. Don't ask me what the acronym means. I'd have to pull my phone out and try to figure out. But I will be here for the next 2 days. And if you guys would like to set up a meeting to kind of go over some of that stuff, I can definitely feel free to get your card or email or hand out my info as well.
Do all our regions have to compete with one another for federal funding?
It is
that's
it
a
is going to
softball
be
question.
it is going to be competitive, unfortunately. And then so that was the other the meeting we had yesterday with the NITR, NRTA, something like that, NITA, NTIA. Yes. So we had that meeting the other day with them and told them, I said, obviously we appreciate this money coming to Alaska. It's definitely a long time coming. And I asked him, I said, so we just hope that this is not the one-off, because this is not going to solve all of our issues. And then so he said, no, it shouldn't be a one-off. We're going to continue to try to fund and try to find other monies to kind of help, with just giving people even flush toilets. That's, some people take for granted, where you get running water. And I, back up north, I used to have to do that as well. So with the North Slope Borough, we've been kind of fortunate to have flush toilets, and it used to suck taking that honey bucket out every single day, and you got like the wind blowing and all that. I won't go into that, but yeah, it's nice now.
I don't know where to go next. I would like to offer our participants here or online, if you guys have questions for our audience, we'd more than likely to have participation from you guys as well on our panel. I think Rihanna and Izzy are here to solicit questions. So we're kind of going back to NTIA though, like, when I talked to NTIA, one of the things that they recommended on the tribal side was a strong partnership with the state. So Rex, how do we identify a strong partnership with the state and talking to the feds? And like for you, Raina, how do we convey to the feds about like the whole Alaska weird story that we've already described? That clearly was thrown into confusion because of Halas.
So to show collaboration, I believe it's to make sure we're on the right page, so we're not duplicating efforts. You never know what, like, so you go after something and like, okay, these guys they've already won something over here, and you guys are trying to do the same. And then so I guess having that one, I guess the voice kind of going after with the state, where we're like, okay, wait, these guys, we just met with so-and-so, that they're trying to do the same thing. So they've already got this area covered. So maybe you guys can cover this portion. I think that type of collaboration would be great. So that means all the cousins are working together, basically, right? And just trying to have that one goal is to bring everybody up to par.
And in terms of the question about how to work with the federal government to let folks know what the differences are that exist in Alaska. So one thing that I've been doing just in Department of the Interior, I organized an ANILCA training recently for all of my senior staff colleagues, and we had 15 people in DOI senior staff take that ANILCA training, which also covers, quite a bit of ANCSA. And it was specifically tailored for Department of the Interior kind of high-level leadership officials. And I think that kind of a thing is invaluable. Like, folks took 8 hours out of their week in order to take this training and to learn a little bit more about the nuances of Alaska. But there's much more that needs to be done. And there's a lot of reminding that unfortunately has to happen over time, which everybody in this room has probably had to do that, going to DC or going to Juneau or wherever. To remind folks of like the specifics of how things work in your region or in the state. And unfortunately, that's just kind of a part of how our government works, right? We get new folks and we have to educate those new folks. But because the secretary has hired me on, I have this platform that I can utilize, not just within the department, but across the agencies to try to ensure that folks understand some of the nuance here. And I think it is working. I think that folks are becoming more and more open to that conversation and to really understanding what those differences between Alaska and the lower 48 are. And part of that is Chehalis, and folks kind of feel like that went a little sideways. But then part of it is also that folks really have a true interest in understanding that, especially in the policy making space, where if you don't understand that nuance, you're not going to make the right decisions necessarily.
Well, I appreciate you doing that because the DOI is pretty huge up here in Alaska. You know, I think Jamie Morendi mentioned this earlier. We have 70 million of federal acres just in the interior, in the Doyon region. And so getting to know the federal agencies has been a career-long effort for me at Doyon. So I appreciate your work on that. And just a question for Liz and Sarah, as ANC advocates, what challenges do you face in your career? And if you could do whatever you wanted, like to change the narrative about ANCs, what narrative would you change?
I think there's two wonderful question. I think there's two things I would change. One, if I could change people's preconceived notions about ANCs, I would do that, because people come in with some assumptions or things that they've heard that are fundamentally wrong, and that shapes how they view ANCs. And then you're automatically starting off on the wrong foot, and you're trying to correct what they understand in their mind is the truth. And so if I could talk to folks who didn't have that background, I think that would be hugely helpful. And secondly, if I was queen for a day, I think I would change the name Alaska Native Corporation, because Alaska Native corporations are truly social enterprises, and we do so much more than a standard corporation in America. And I think that name puts us on the wrong foot.
Do you have a new name?
No.
I'll take ideas.
Sure. Yeah. You know, I think it could be helpful when people see, even if they're seeing the name Alaska Native Corporation or NANA Regional Corporation or something like that, if instead of seeing those words, they actually just saw our leadership and somehow just sort of where they're coming from was like transported into their minds and their hearts, I think that would make a big difference. And I think it really just goes to the understanding piece. I know Koluk already addressed this earlier, but I'll repeat it. Our board is comprised of 23 people. It's more like, you know, a legislature. It's 23 people elected by our 15,000 shareholders. And because the way that we're set up, it's 2 people from each of our 11 villages who reside in the village. And then they're Kotzebue and then at large. But our board is comprised of our village leadership who has stepped up to say, I'll serve on this board. And so if you didn't know anything about our corporation, but you saw our elected board members and just their day-to-day life, I think you'd get a really different picture of who we are. You would see our chair, Linda Lee from Shungnak, who has learned in UPEC, and she's fluent, and she is just holding down the fort, wearing 15 hats, living our way of life in the village. So I think if I could just wave a wand, I'd just let you see who our leadership is, and that drives every single thing that we do. That drove, you know, recently our board giving us the directive to submit comments to the state legislature stating we support HB 123, which is a state recognition of tribes bill. You know, our board just gives us that kind of directive to do what they think is right, what's good for our people. Yeah.
Thanks, Liz. Make them all Indigenous people. Just kidding. I took it next level. A bunch of questions are coming in. I should have solicited questions earlier because these are great questions. So I'm going to start walking through them. Has any progress been made to address ANCSA contaminated lands that you can share with this audience? Oh.
Yeah.
So this is a very popular topic and also a really important one. There have been some recent articles about the contamination and what sort of an impact that's had on communities, which is really pretty tragic. And so I think from the Department of the Interior's perspective, and what our lawyers tell us is that, we have certain authorities to do certain things on this issue, but at the end of the day, whoever did the contamination originally has to kind of step up a little bit more, right? So if it's a former DOD site or if it's a Superfund site, EPA or DOD will probably have parts of that. But from our perspective, we are very dedicated to trying to do what we can with our limited authorities to help with the issue. And so what we have done is work across all of our agency colleagues to try to come up with a strategy, a joint strategy for how we go forward. And so we do have a draft of that with EPA, with transportation and several other agencies. And we're working with the White House directly to try to figure out how we can make some forward progress. And this has been an intractable issue for a long time. The work does get done slowly over time, right? But absolutely, we agree that it should be happening faster and there should be more money for this. So we're certainly trying to do all that we can to address it, and also keeping in touch with the state as well, since the state's also very interested in this topic.
Yes, we are. We've been talking with some of the other leaders, and going back to, I guess, what Raina was talking about, where we've been given land and then find out there's waste buried underneath, which is not acceptable. And we've dealt with it for a number of years, and our people tend to get a little more emboldened when it's not taken care of for X amount of years. And so now they're starting to say, okay, we've got deadlines. You guys need to meet our needs in X amount of years. And Governor Dunleavy is in support of that, and is definitely willing to continue having conversations to try to help figure this situation out, try to get this problem resolved. And hopefully we'll continue to have those conversations with the federal government.
This next question is probably also for Raina, because I don't think I could answer it. How can young students plan to work in Secretary Holland's office or in the broader Interior Department?
Don't tell them you got job security. That's a great question. So I'm always trying to encourage young Native people to come to DC and get some experience in DC. I think it's really important. I think it gives you a entirely new perspective on the federal bureaucracy and how it works. Oftentimes it teaches you that things move very slowly sometimes and that you have to be patient and continue the work. But for folks who want to engage in DC, especially for young students, I really encourage folks to look into internships, right? The internships that are in DC are amazing, whether you're working on the Hill with a senator or representative, or if you're working at the White House as an intern. There are really amazing opportunities out there for folks who want to kind of have that 2 or 3 month experience without the commitment of kind of just throwing yourself into a full-time job in Washington, DC. It's a really wonderful way to get that experience, but also learn whether or not you like this kind of work, right? And so the same thing goes for Secretary Holland's office. I believe we are looking into developing an internship program. And if folks want to come work with me, that would be great too. I'm hoping to also have some sort of a program within my office to accept interns and be able to help grow our next generation of policy leaders.
I have to add to this because I'm a huge advocate for internships. I encourage you to, for those of you who are just completing your college degrees and looking for what do I do next, do a 2-year stint in DC. Because if you're really passionate about Alaska Native issues and you want to be a leader in this state going forward, having the experience in Washington, DC is absolutely critical. And that will really fast track your career. So do an internship while you're in college. And then when you're done with college, maybe go back and spend a couple of years working in a federal agency or with one of the Alaska delegation.
I'm not going to touch on that. I just wanted to say that I am proud of Thiele. You know, she's been there for both administrations, even though I didn't vote for those two. Still love her. She's awesome. So congratulations and keep up the great work. Thank you. And as well as all the other leaders, I know it's tough. You got shareholders coming at you all the time. And you know, it's definitely not an easy role. So I don't know why you guys like doing this type of stuff.
But don't pass the mic, Rex, because this next question's for you, talking about shareholders coming for you. Rex, what did you mean by acknowledging and addressing subsistence that may create a ripple effect? The state is concerned about as many Alaskan families facing hardships and no salmon.
So with the ripple effect, it was the short supply of salmon, and then it's like, okay, well, do we issue another permit for another moose? And then what's that going to do to the moose population? And then it's like, well, do we put in a different type of wildlife here? And then what's that going to do to the others' food supply? And so it's like, well, we have to look at everything to poke holes in everything that somebody comes up with, so that way we don't add more to the issue. So it's definitely a Rubik's Cube, and I would say that's kind of the fun part, and the sad part about it too is just trying to make sure that we get it right.
So this last I won't say last question, but next question is probably for everyone on the panel. Looking forward, if there were any amendments to be made to ANCSA, what would you advocate for?
Yeah, so this hasn't been vetted by anybody. This is just me. My VP of Lands is really giving me a concerned look right now. You know, ANCSA and ANILCA really just didn't get it right in protecting our ways of life, period. There was, and you know, ANCSA was intended to be the thing that protected us, and there in some drafts had been language to protect Alaska Native rights and responsibilities around subsistence that got dropped. And on the legislative record, the state of Alaska and the Secretary of Interior committed to protecting Alaska Native subsistence rights. And we just have, and the reality is that the regulatory framework is very confusing, and we, I think we could do a paradigm shift on all of that. And so whether it's amending, and don't quote me again as representing anybody but myself, but whether that's an amendment to ANILCA, to an ANCSA, whichever way you want to do it, we really have to have that security. I guess I could say food security. I could also say, spiritual security, cultural security, economic security that needs to be resolved, because our people need to be able to live our lives without fear of being penalized. I think there's some really wonderful examples of co-management relationships where numerous people representing numerous governments are at the table, and that really is a step in the right direction. We know that there are different species that are managed under co-management relationships, and really there's just so much opportunity for creative thinking and really moving the dial to make sure our people get to thrive. I think about my kids. I have an 11-year-old and an 8.5-year-old, and like, what does the future look like for them in being who we are as Inupiat? So that's one thought I have. And I see Professor Stevens in the audience, and I see Brooke, and I know that they're really interested in co-management. Whenever I'm looking at non-BIA Department of Interior co-management opportunities, I think of Professor Stevens, because right there's opportunity galore for moving the dial on protecting our ways of life. So that's something I'm excited about. Probably everybody, I'll just pass it down.
So I won't comment specifically on what I would advocate for because we don't know yet. We haven't summarized our consultation comments yet, so I don't want to say something that is not accurately reflecting what's in those comments. But I think that Liz is completely right that there certainly could be additional protections for Alaska Native subsistence. And I think that, you know, we've seen the cracks kind of emerge over time, and we haven't seen those issues addressed. And so that's one thing that we have committed to, is looking at that input that we've received to ensure that we understand what the ask is from the Alaska Native community, and that we are acting on it to try to make some improvements.
I agree, ladies, and I would also, reaffirm what I said earlier about codifying, requiring federal agencies to consult with Alaska Native corporations, as well as exempting elder benefits in settlement trusts from needs-based programs. So I would certainly put those in there. I think making ANCs automatically eligible for FEHB healthcare services would be huge. Particularly, because right now only some ANCs are able to offer those to their employees, and that's a huge issue because it's great health insurance. So I would certainly add that in there. And then there's two other issues I would have done. If I could go back to 1971 under ANCSA in the original drafting, I would have put a timeline in when our land is going to be titled to us from the federal government, because it's 50 years after ANCSA. And we still don't have all of it, folks. When is that going to be done? So I would do that. And then if hindsight's 2020, if I could look back and make changes, I would have said in the agreement that if we were given contaminated lands, that they have to clean them up within a certain time frame. And if they're unable to clean up those lands because of institutional controls or other issues, then we need to be financially compensated for that loss. So those are mine.
Ditto. It's crazy to think that the ANCSA is not that old. I mean, it's not even an elder, basically. I mean, it's so crazy to think about how everybody thinks it's so long ago just because it's kind of in black and white, and they had to go over a radio to kind of hear how things were going. I mean, well, some areas are still kind of like that, but with being Native, we tend to, like Sarah had alluded to, taking care of your elders, your elderly. I mean, they get to eat first. We go get them food. We go bring them food. We go get water. We go get ice. We go get all of those things. So I think that would be the main thing there is that. And then also, yes, the clean lands, that would be huge too, is we don't want, I mean, we do want lands, but not when it's contaminated. I mean, we had Project Chariot back at home, and I jokingly, when I was at school, and I told them that, that's why my teeth are white, and that's why I'm 6 foot, as opposed to some of the other Inupiats that tend to be short. It's just because we were, that's where the caribou would go. I mean, it would eat, and it's like, so we heard the elders talk about how they would see lights going on over there at night, and they didn't know what the heck was going on, and they were told to stay away. And so it's definitely time to get those sites cleaned up and do what's right. Thank you.
This next question is maybe a suggestion, but if not, is anyone producing a briefing book on tribes and ANCs that can be used for educating federal and or state legislators and officials? Somebody in the audience is
I feel like
smarter.
we were just given a homework assignment. Thanks. Thanks whoever tossed that one out. Appreciate it. I'm getting a thumbs up over here. Okay, we'll work on that.
It'll be collaborative with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Is the regional corporations working with village corporations, and what is the relationship like?
That's a great question. Thank you. And NAN is unique because we are one of the couple of regional corporations which merged with all but one of our village corporations. So that is in part why we have a Congress instead of, with 23 people on our board. And we do have one village corporation in our region, Takata Corporation, and we do coordinate with them. I'm very new, so I wouldn't be able to tell you the details about that ongoing coordination, but we do that coordination. I do think our region's a little bit different though, and so it means that we've got, different levels of actual NANA staff placed in villages and such, rather than, village corporation staff being there. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I'd like to answer that from two perspectives, on a personal level and on a professional level. So personally, I am a shareholder of Koniag Incorporated, which is my regional corporation, and my village corporation is a Fognak Native corporation. They work very closely together on a number of issues that impact our region and my village. For instance, during the COVID pandemic, they joined forces with CANA, which is our regional health nonprofit. And the three of them put boxes of food together. Three organizations worked together to bring food to my village for elders who couldn't leave their home during the pandemic. And so it's initiatives like that that are really boots on the ground and incredibly meaningful to the Native people in our communities. Professionally, Siri participates in a regional forum called the Takata Forum. And in fact, I didn't fly up here yesterday because I was at the Takata Forum. And it's where all of our regional organizations and our village organizations come together and we talk about issues of regional importance. We give updates on every village, every organization gives updates. And we just completed a strategic planning process where we all work together to identify what we want to do as a region going forward. And so I'm really excited to see how we implement that and look at ways where we could strengthen our relationships with our village corporations and our tribes, and maybe look at some projects to do together in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, so working at the state, you get to see how everybody's extremely different. Where the North Slope is different than the Northwest, even though we're so close. Where they only have one village corporation, and so we have ASRC, which is our regional corporation. You have Tikia Corp, you have UIC, you have we all compete against each other. It's like one crazy family with one huge big brother. So we tend to, like, some federal contracts that we go after together, or some of the North Slope borough work. And then so coming to the Southeast, you tend to see like the tribes seem to be a little more like the gung-ho part. And so it's fascinating to kind of see how everybody just found their niche and ran with it. And so, I don't tell Senior, but he tends to beat up on some of the village corporations a little bit with SKW when we try to chase after some of the North Slope borough work. But it's just how it is. I mean, it makes everybody a little more sharp. And you learn how to reverse some of the bids and then kind of go from there. But they started ASRC started the CED program, where they tried to make sure the village corporations were all going to be healthy like, and then learned their niche and ran with it with the federal contracting, because it's with the ANCs, it's federal contracting. So that's usually the government will always have money, and that's usually where you try to go to get some of that coin. And so ASRC is willing to partner. So yes, the regional corporations and the village corporations tend to work together really well. And then you see now like the Southeast side where the tribes work with some of the other corporations within that realm. And so it's definitely interesting to see.
So I apologize, guys. I was just checking in on the time, and our panel time is up, but I do want to offer a last closing comments. And I don't know if you want to give closing comments or talk about what you want to see for the next 50 years or so last comments.
Well, I think for mine, one thing I forgot to highlight when we were first having this conversation around ANCs and regions and the Halas litigation and all of that. One thing that I'd love to see within the state of Alaska is a recognition of all of these differences that we see between regions, because I think that's one thing that we kind of get absorbed into our own regions and we kind of know how that works. But to hear about the Nana region and Arctic slope, I mean, these have very different methods for doing their work and working locally and working with village corporations, working with tribes. It's very different across the board. And I think that as much as we see this gap in information in the lower 48 about Alaska, we also have some blinders on here in the state too, as Alaska Native people, because we don't see how other folks are doing things, right? Not always. And I think until we can kind of really build those relationships and that understanding here in Alaska, that's what's going to pull the state together, right, as a whole, versus having folks who are, joining certain litigation, which, and being on sort of opposite sides of these issues. And so I think that's really important, just to educate ourselves too about how ANCSA played out across all the different regions, because it played out very differently. I think a lot of us just don't realize that. So I would really encourage that we all try to find out a little bit more about our neighbors and understand how things have been structured.
It's like, which way do we go? I think that I definitely take that to heart. And I think from the perspective of Nana, I think we recognize that Alaska is so small, even though it's so huge. And with our families having been here for 10,000 years, we have relatives in every corner of the state. And so I think it's important that we are at the table together, having tea, sharing our nikabang, our traditional foods, and hearing each other out. I think it's so important to have those tough conversations, because life is hard and the things that we're talking about are so hard. And also a lot of us, carry a lot of intergenerational trauma. We carry a lot of grief, especially with the loss during the pandemic. So life is hard. And I think that we do believe in sitting down and having those conversations. We're relatives. I think in Alaska, and also our indigenous homeland starts in Russia and it ends in Greenland. And I know that all of our people have those, our homelands may span our national borders. So I think kind of resetting our worldview in who we are and just remembering who we are and that we are all relatives in some way, shape, form, or another, and then having those hard conversations. I hope to model that. I know sometimes I'm a little hot-headed, but I do hope to be modeling that for my kids, so that we really, what we're doing takes time. We've been here for 10,000 years. ANCSA's 50 years old. It's a baby. Stuff's still getting figured out. And so if we're kind of here with an open mind and have the conversations, I think we'll do really well for our future. So thanks.
I think I'd just like to end saying that we're all one people, whether you're here wearing your ANC hat, or you're wearing your tribal hat, or your nonprofit hat. We're all the same people. We all serve the same people. And I think it's critically important in the next 50 years of ANCSA that we work together with ANCs, tribes, and nonprofits. And that's how we're really going to advance our Native communities. Thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies, for letting me share the stage with you. For closing, you know, I guess with the whole anxious stuff with land and development, I was able to witness firsthand that they can coexist. You know, we have oil on the North Slope, and we still hold true to our people, to our way of life. We still go mak, we still have chagrok, we still sayok, Eskimo dance. You know, we still have our arts and crafts, we still have stories, we still listen to elders. You know, we try to hold true. And to me, I guess that's kind of what, you know, obviously trying to get your lands back from the Fed side, but still trying to develop and make your home a better place for your kids. So you try to work towards that next generation, which I think, you know, Jacob Adams and Oliver Levitt for North Slope, that's what they did really well. And then now Senior and his staff are taking it to that next level. So I look forward to my little guy to see where his group is going to take all of that too. And it's kind of exciting and worrisome at the same time. But you know, once again, thank you for allowing me to be here on the panel with these lovely ladies.
Let's give our panelists a warm thank you. Thank you, guys. And I just confirmed with Tia, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break, and then we'll reconvene with our last panel for the day. And Tia and I have some gifts of thanks for this panel.